It started the way small things often do. Without any announcement, in a place that never meant to matter. Every Thursday evening I stopped by Gray's Corner Cafe, a little place that smelled like burnt espresso and old paper menace. I went there to wait out traffic, half out of habit, half because it felt like a pause button on the week. That's where she walked in, Mrs. Lang, my friend's mom. She used to drop off snacks during high school study sessions, polite, composed, always in a hurry. But now, years later, she stood at the counter wearing a light cardigan, and that kind of distracted calm people carry when they've been alone too long. She ordered a cappuccino, glanced around for a seat, and her eyes landed on me. "Daniel," she said, tilting her head with a small, surprised smile. I stood too quickly, almost knocking over my cup. "Hey. Wow, it's been a while." She laughed softly, like the sound of a page turning. "You grew up." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and gestured toward the empty chair across from me. "You can sit here, if you want. The place is pretty full." She hesitated, not out of discomfort, but maybe out of instinct, then smiled again and sat down. For a few minutes we talked about nothing. Her weather, her work, my move back into town. The kind of talk that stays on the surface because diving deeper feels too early, too dangerous. Still, there was something different. The pauses stretched a little longer. Her eyes lingered when I spoke. I caught myself glancing at her hands as she stirred her coffee. How steady they were. She wore no ring now. I remembered her husband had left a few years back, though I didn't ask. When she reached for a napkin, her bracelet clinked against the table. A quiet, precise sound that somehow made the air between us sharpen. "So," she said, "how's Alex? You two still in touch?" I folded the edge of my napkin until it was a perfect triangle. "Not really. He moved to Boston." She nodded slowly, eyes distant. "He was always chasing something bigger." I smiled. "Wes, we all are." Something in that line seemed to settle between us. Not heavy, but close, like we'd both said more than we meant to. We stayed that way. Her looking out the window, me watching the steam rise from her cup. Until the cafe music switched to something older, softer. She hummed a few notes under her breath, just loud enough for me to notice. "You always did that," I said quietly. She blinked. "Did what?" "Hummed when you were thinking." A pause. Then she smiled, not wide but deep enough to show she remembered too. When she finally stood to leave, she reached into her purse for her phone. "It was good to see you, Daniel. You should come by sometime. Alex's old room is still there." I looked up, caught off guard by how easily the words came out of her mouth. Like she'd been waiting to say them. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice even. "Maybe I will." She left a few minutes later. The chair across from me still held the shape of her presence, warmth fading slowly. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I found your old hoodie in the garage. Thought you might want it back." No name, but I didn't need one. I stood there on the sidewalk, the evening light turning gold and quiet, rereading the text until the words felt heavier than they should. And for the first time in years, I didn't delete it. I told myself I was just stopping by to grab that old hoodie. Nothing more. But when she opened the door, it didn't feel like a quick errand anymore. Mrs. Lang, Claire, she insisted I call her now, stood in the doorway wearing a loose cream sweater and jeans. The house smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish, like memory had soaked into the walls. "Come in," she said softly. "It's colder than it looks." The same living room where I'd spent high school weekends now felt smaller, quieter. The framed family photos were still on the mantel, though most had been turned slightly toward the wall. I tried not to look too long at the ones with Alex in them. She handed me the hoodie, neatly folded. "It's been sitting in the garage for years. I almost threw it out a few times." I smiled. "Glad you didn't." She smiled back, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Coffee?" I should have said no. I didn't. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Same chairs, same chipped mug I remembered from before. She poured 2 cups, her movements slow, deliberate. Her hand brushed mine briefly when she passed the sugar. It wasn't intentional, but it stayed in the air between us long after she pulled away. She asked about work, about my parents. I answered, but half my mind was studying the way she kept tucking a strand of hair behind her ear when she didn't know what to say. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "You remind me of him sometimes." Alex. It caught me off guard. "Yeah, not the way you look," she said, stirring her coffee though she hadn't added anything. "Just how you listen." He used to listen like that. Before everything got too loud. I didn't know how to respond. The silence stretched. I could hear the soft tick of the kitchen clock, the hum of the fridge. Finally, I said, "I think he got that from you." Her eyes lifted to meet mine, surprised. "What do you mean?" "You're the same way," I said. "You make space for people. Even when you shouldn't have to." Her lips parted like she was about to argue, then closed again. Something fragile crossed her face, something like recognition. For a while we just sat there. I took a sip of my coffee even though it had gone cold. She traced the rim of her cup with her thumb, eyes down. When I finally stood to leave, she followed me to the door. "Daniel," she said quietly as I slipped on my jacket, "you don't have to keep calling me Mrs. Lang. That feels old." I nodded. "All right, Claire." The word felt too intimate, like a secret I wasn't supposed to speak aloud. As I stepped outside, she touched my sleeve, just a light brush of fingers, but it stopped me mid-breath. "Drive safe," she murmured. It should have sounded ordinary, but it didn't. On the way home, I caught myself replaying that moment, her voice echoing softly. I didn't know why it stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. And that scared me more than anything. I started finding excuses to stop by. Returning a charger I never borrowed. Asking if she still needed help fixing the porch light. None of it made sense, and she knew it. One evening, I showed up with 2 cups of coffee, pretending I'd just been passing through. She raised an eyebrow when she opened the door. "Coincidence?" she asked. "Must I said. But she let me in anyway. The house looked different at dusk. Softer somehow. The golden light from the kitchen filtered through the blinds, cutting her silhouette into lines and shadows. She'd been painting. A half-finished canvas leaned against the wall, a swirl of muted colors she hadn't named yet. "I didn't know you painted," I said. "I didn't, before," she murmured, wiping her hands on a towel. "Started after the divorce. Helps me think." She didn't say helps me forget, but I heard it anyway. We stood side by side, staring at the canvas. She had paint on her wrist. A small blue smudge, and for some reason I couldn't look away. "Here," I said, handing her the coffee. Our fingers brushed. It felt like static. A quiet jolt that stayed too long. She noticed. I saw it in the way her eyes flicked down, then away. "You shouldn't keep coming here, Daniel," she said softly, after a moment. "People might misunderstand." I nodded, though my chest tightened. "And you? What about me? Would you misunderstand?" Her breath caught, just for a second, before she smiled, small and tired. "You shouldn't ask questions like that." We both looked toward the open window when we heard footsteps. Someone outside. I moved to close it, but she stopped me with a hand on my arm. It was her neighbor, walking her dog harmless. But still, her hand stayed. Just long enough to make it mean something. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was charged, too much air, too little space. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Alex. "Hey man. My mom said she's seen you around. You helping her with the house. That's cool." I froze. She saw the name flash on my screen. Something flickered across her face, not guilt exactly, but a sudden awareness of the thin ice we were standing on. She stepped back. "You should probably go," she said quietly. I wanted to say something, anything, but words wouldn't come. I just stood there, my throat dry, heart beating where it shouldn't. At the door, she hesitated, reached up like she might touch my face, then stopped halfway. Her hand hovered there, inches from my skin, trembling slightly. Neither of us moved. Then she exhaled, turned the motion into something else. Brushed a speck of paint off my shoulder instead. "There," she whispered. "Better." Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. And in that small, broken, almost touch, the line we didn't cross became the one we both couldn't forget. It was raining the day everything almost came undone. Not a storm, just that quiet, steady kind that makes the world move slower. She texted first this time. "Power's out here. I can't get the generator working." I told myself it was just to help. Just to fix a switch. But I grabbed my jacket and drove over before she even replied. When she opened the door, Candlelight spilled across her face, soft, gold, too intimate for something so ordinary. She looked surprised, but not entirely. You came fast, she said. You sounded frustrated. I wasn't, she murmured, but her voice faltered like she wasn't sure. The generator didn't matter. I found the problem within minutes. A tripped breaker. But she kept standing there, holding a candle, eyes half-shadowed, like she didn't really want me to leave yet. Coffee? She asked, though the power was still out. Sore. We sat by the window while the rain kept falling, her small camping kettle heating on a gas stove. Steam curled up, ghost-like, between us. She said, almost to herself, it's funny. I used to hate silence, now I crave it. I glanced at her. Silence with the right person isn't silence. She smiled, then looked down, tracing the rim of her mug. You shouldn't say things like that, Daniel. Why not? Because I might start believing them. Her tone was light, but her eyes, they weren't. Something shifted then, quiet but deep. The kind of moment you feel before you understand it. I wanted to ask her what she meant. I wanted to say what I'd been thinking for weeks. Instead, I just said, you deserve someone who sees you like that. She laughed under her breath, shaking her head. And you think you do. The words hit harder than she meant them to. She noticed immediately. I didn't. It's okay, I cut in. You're right. We fell silent again. The rain softened against the window. She reached out suddenly, placing her hand over mine. Tentative at first, then firm enough that I couldn't pretend it was nothing. I don't know what this is, she said, barely above a whisper. I just know it's not supposed to be. Her hand was warm. Mine didn't move. I could feel the confession rising in my chest, all the things I hadn't said, all the nights I'd replayed her voice in my head. But saying them out loud would make it real, so I didn't. Instead, I looked at her. Really looked. And said, do you ever think about what would have happened if we met at a different time? She inhaled sharply. Candlelight flickered between us, bending shadows across her face. Her answer was barely a breath. Every day, and that was it, the point of no return that neither of us crossed, but we both knew the line was gone. She stopped texting. No warning, no explanation, just quiet. At first, I thought she was busy, a few days, then a week too. The silence started to feel like its own kind of message. I tried not to overthink it, told myself people drift, routines shift. But every evening, I still caught myself driving the long way home, past her street, just in case her lights were on. They weren't. The last time I'd seen her, she'd said every day like a confession. I'd gone home replaying those 2 words until they didn't sound real anymore. Now, it was as if they'd never been said. Then one night, I saw her again. At the cafe where it all started, I almost didn't recognize her. She was dressed like someone preparing to leave, simple clothes, hair tied back, a small travel bag by her chair. I hesitated, then walked over. Claire, she looked out. Her smile was polite, not warm. Daniel. Hi. Didn't expect to see you here, I said. I'm heading to stay with my sister for a while, she replied, eyes flicking to the bag. She's been needing help, I nodded. That's good. It wasn't. She sipped her coffee, gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. I wanted to ask what happened, what changed. But I already knew. Or at least, I thought I did. Something had caught up with her. Guilt, or fear. Or the realization that what we'd almost started could only end one way. I didn't mean to disappear, she said finally, voice quiet. It just felt like the right thing to do. For who? I asked before I could stop myself. She looked at me then. Really looked. And I could see the conflict in her eyes, the exhaustion of someone trying to be good when good hurts. For both of us, she said. There it was. The end dressed up as reason. She reached across the table, fingers brushing the rim of my cup but not me. You're young, Daniel. You'll move on from this. I smiled, but it felt like pretending. Maybe. When she left, she didn't say goodbye. Just a small nod, as if she were afraid that any more would undo her. I sat there long after she was gone, staring at her empty chair. The barista cleared her cup away, wiped the table clean, like she'd never been there. That night, I drafted a message. You didn't have to protect me from something I already chose. I typed it, reread it, deleted it. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. Outside the rain started again, and for a long time, I just listened, waiting for something that wasn't coming back. Weeks passed before I saw her again. It happened by accident, or maybe it didn't. The mind has a way of leading you where you're not supposed to go. I was at the hardware store, standing in line with a box of light bulbs. She walked in wearing a pale blue coat, hair damp from rain. She froze when she saw me. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "Daniel," she breathed out, relieved, half caught. "You look well." "You disappeared." It came out softer than I meant, but the truth still landed between us like a dropped glass. She sighed, shifting the bag in her hand. "I know. I thought leaving would make it easier." "Did it?" Her eyes met mine, tired and honest. "No." We stood there, surrounded by the quiet hum of other people's lives. The cashier called for the next customer. Neither of us moved. Finally, she said, "Walk with me." Outside, the rain had stopped. The parking lot shimmered with puddles reflecting the gray sky. We walked without speaking, the silence filling up with everything we hadn't said. After a while, she stopped near a bench under a streetlight. The air smelled like wet asphalt and faint perfume. "I kept thinking," she said, "about that night. About how close I came to saying something I couldn't take back." I swallowed. "You could've." She shook her head slowly. "You don't understand. I'm supposed to know better." "I never asked you to," I said quietly. "I just wanted you to be honest." Her lips parted, then closed again. She looked down at her hands. Hands that used to move so carefully around me, like I might break something invisible. "I wasn't trying to protect you," she whispered. "I was protecting myself. From feeling something that didn't make sense anymore." "That's the thing," I said. "It doesn't have to." The words surprised even me. Not because they were brave, but because they were true. She looked up then, eyes wet but steady. "You think if I let myself feel this, it ends well for either of us?" "No," I said. "But it ends honestly." The silence that followed was heavy but not cruel. It was the sound of two people finally standing still. She reached out, fingertips brushing my sleeve. The same gesture from before, only this time she didn't pull away. Her voice trembled. "I can't promise anything, Daniel. I'm not asking for anything. I just don't disappear again." She exhaled, a small, broken laugh slipping through. "That's not a fair trade. Neither of us ever got a fair one." She nodded slowly, eyes searching mine. Not for permission, but for truth. Then she said it so softly I almost missed it. "Okay, that was all. No grand ending, no promises, just a quiet human okay," the sound of something finally unclenching. 6 months later, it didn't feel like a secret anymore. Just something small that belonged to the quiet parts of life. I still came by on Sundays. Sometimes I fixed a shelf, helped with the garden, or brought her coffee from Gray's Corner Cafe, black for me, tea for her. She never drank it all, just let it sit and go cold while she talked. We never defined what we were. There was no talk of us, no labels, no promises, just two people who'd stopped pretending they didn't look forward to seeing each other. The air between us had changed. Lighter, though still lined with something careful. I think we'd both realized that peace wasn't the absence of feeling, but the space where feeling could breathe. She started painting again. This time, she left her canvases unfinished on purpose, said she liked seeing them in progress. I knew what she meant. One morning, around 8:47 a.m., I stopped by to return a book I'd borrowed. A small poetry collection she'd once said wasn't really her thing. When she opened the door, she was still in her robe, hair loosely tied, eyes soft with sleep. "You're early," she said, smiling. "You're late," I said, handing her the book. "Coffee." "Always." We sat on the porch bench, the same one from months ago, now sanded and repainted. The neighborhood had woken up around us, dogs barking, mail trucks humming, the world carrying on like it didn't know we'd once almost ruined everything. She leaned back, watching the sky. "You know," she said, "I used to think wanting something at my age was foolish. And now?" She looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that didn't need translation. "Now I just think it's human. We didn't reach for each other. We didn't have to." There was something steadier in the way our silences lined up now, less charged, more alive. The candlelight nights, the unsent messages, the long pauses. They'd all thinned into something simple. Something that didn't ache anymore. When I stood to leave, she touched my arm lightly. "You'll come by next week. Probably sooner." She smiled. A small, private thing that didn't reach the world beyond her porch. As I walked to my car, I caught her reflection in the window. Still standing there, still watching. For the first time, I didn't feel suspended between what was right and what was real. I just felt home. Later, sitting at a red light, I realized I'd forgotten my coffee mug on her counter again. I thought about turning back. I didn't. It felt right to leave something behind. Maybe love wasn't about holding on. Maybe it was about finally being seen and staying.